Mordecai Sandberg. Mordecai Markus Sandberg, February 4, 1897 December 28, 1973, was a composer and physician. He was a creative and prolific composer, a musical theorist, and an innovative physician in the area of alternative and natural medicine in 1920s and 1930s Jerusalem. Sandberg was a pioneer in the field of microtonal theory and music. He believed that a microtonal system of music could be the basis of making a music of humanity that would bring people together from all cultures and transcend local traditions. He argued that although there seemed to be a conflict between the Western and Eastern tonal systems, there was in reality one music and one humanity. He developed his Universal Tonal System, a synthesis of oriental and occidental scales using microtones. He also designed several instruments and a notation system for microtonal music. As a composer of microtonal music, Sandberg intended to translate and interpret the sacred texts of all the world's religions to musical form. He began his monumental project with the Hebrew Bible from his own European Jewish tradition. He theorized that microtonal music, incorporating the tonal traditions of Asia, was an appropriate means for setting Hebrew, an oriental language, to music. Over the course of his life, Sandberg produced some 20,000 pages of musical composition. His magnum opus was symphonic psalms, the setting of the Book of Psalms to music, a task which comprised more than 12,000 pages of composition. Early life. Sandberg was born in the town of Halle, but grew up in Susiva in Bukovina, a province of what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Sandberg studied medicine at the University of Vienna during World War I, under such professors as Julius Tandler, a well-known academic and political figure in Vienna at the time. While pursuing a medical education, Sandberg informally studied music. It was during this time that he began his earliest surviving creative work, Demosthenes, a play and later an overture which was completed in 1925. Although his studies were interrupted because of the war, Sandberg graduated from the University of Vienna in 1921 as a medical doctor. Moved to Jerusalem. After World War I, Austria ended its control over the city of Susiva, and in 1922 Sandberg moved to Jerusalem in the British Mandate of Palestine. There he opened a medical clinic utilizing alternative medical techniques, including vitamin and herbal therapies, diet change, and spiritual healing. His patients ran the spectrum of people living in the Palestine and beyond, and he journeyed at times to Egypt to care for patients using his alternative techniques. As part of his practice of medicine, he authored The Way of Spiritual Healing According to the Jewish Tradition 1939, a book published in Hebrew. While working as a medical doctor in Palestine, Sandberg pursued his passion for music and he was active as a composer. In 1924, Sandberg began composing music to the Book of Psalms. In 1925, Sandberg's musical composition, Kohelet Ecclesiastes, was performed in Jerusalem. In 1926, he founded the Palestine Musicians Association together with composers Jacob Weinberg and Solomon Rostowski. In 1926, Sandberg married the painter Hannah Rosner. In 1927, he was one of the founders of the Palestine section of the International Society for Contemporary Music. In the same year, he organized concerts for his own works and that of German composer Willy von Moellendorff in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. He lectured in the quarter-tone system in Palestinian music in Tel Aviv and offered courses in air training to performers and composers. In 1928, Sandberg presented a concert in Jerusalem of his own works and those of Arnold Schoenberg. In 1929, he arranged concerts of his works in Germany and published a paper on his theory of microtonal music entitled Die Musik der Menschheit, die Tondifferen zueinander Hebedütende der Hauptstoff für Musik in Berlin. He also designed a harmonium with 12th and 16th tones. In 1930, he founded the Hebrew monthly magazine, Hal, which included photographs of some instruments of his design. In 1938, Sandberg took part in an international conference on music and art in London. His lecture on microtonal music was later broadcast on the BBC. After the conference, he organized a number of concerts, broadcasts, and lectures of his work in England. The BBC program planner and advocate of contemporary music Edward Clarke said that Sandberg was a composer in whose path new music is following. Sandberg himself settled in the United States after the outset of World War II, later bringing his family to New York City following the end of the war. In 1939, he offered a number of lectures in music in New York, including one on radio station waved about the problems of Palestinian music. In 1940, he taught a course at the New York College of Music on the subject of microtonal music. Over the next few years, concerts of his music were performed at Carnegie Hall, on radio station WCBS-FM, and at New York's Town Hall. In 1949, Sandberg's works Eskra, I Remember, and Ruth were performed at Town Hall. The former was begun in 1938 in memory of those who were suffering persecution at the hands of the Nazis in Germany, but it was completed after the war when the full extent of the destruction of World War II became known. Over the next 20 years, Sandberg devoted his time to composing musical settings for the entire Bible. In 1970, he moved to Toronto, Ontario, Canada, where he obtained a position as a teaching fellow at Stone College of York University. He died in Toronto on December 28, 1973. Performances. In recent years, Sandberg's music has been performed at the American Festival of Microtonal Music. In 1999, Sandberg's Psalm 51 was performed with soloist Dutch soprano Dorian Verheijden. Recordings. Mordecai Sandberg chamber works consisting of music composed between 1938 and 1948, performed by Adele Armin, James Wallenberg, Laura Wilcox, Richard Armin, Stephen Clark, and Mark Sarat, and recorded at York University. Selected works. Demosthenes Overture 1925, unpublished. Koheleth Ecclesiastes for violin and pianoforte 1925, Symphony No. 1 1925. Four Little Preludes for pianoforte 1925-1929, unpublished. Elohai Neshama for three flutes, English horn, and bass clarinet 1926, unpublished. Sonata No. 1, Quarter Tone Hymn 1927. Symphony No. 2 1928. The Vision of Isaiah for baritone solo and organ 1934. Elisha Fantasy for violin and pianoforte 1938. Sim Shalom for five tenors, baritone solo, list and organ 1938. Esker I Remember Oratorio for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass and orchestra 1938-1952, Symphony No. 5 1939-1953. Or No. 2 for violin and pianoforte 1940. Shalosh Esri Midot the 13 Attributes for baritone solo and organ 1940. String Quartet No. 1 1941. Tel Aviv for violin and pianoforte 1941. The 5 Points for orchestra 1942. Concerto for clarinet and strings 1943. Hymn Aria Dance for clarinet and pianoforte 1943. Palestinian Suite for violoncello and microtonal organ 1943. Sonata for pianoforte 1943-1946. Symphony No. 4 1944-1959. Ezekiel 34 for violin and quartet tone organ 1945. Or No. 3 for string quartet 1945. The Song of Songs Sonata No. 3 for violin 1945. Three sonatas for violin 1945-1948. A Little Palestinian New Year's Festival. 1. Seven Simhathinu, the Season of Our Gladness, a Sukkot song for baritone solo and pianoforte. 2. In Thy Pavilion, O Eternal, Psalm 15, first the original work list. 3. Happy is everyone who reveres the Eternal, Psalm 128, first the original work list. 4. Lal, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine, for violin, violoncello, and pianoforte. 4. Lal for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass and pianoforte. 5. Kaddish for violoncello or trombone and pianoforte 1946. Sonata No. 6 in C for bichromatic organ 1946. Aura for orchestra 1947. Jerusalem Hymn for violin and pianoforte 1948. Sonata in A for pianoforte 1948. 3 sonatas for viola 1948. Symphony No. 3 1948-1953. Psalm 130 for English horn and pianoforte 1949. Quintet the 5 Points for string quartet and pianoforte 1951. Sextet for clarinet, string quartet, and pianoforte 1951. Symphonic Psalms for soprano, alto, tenor, and bass and orchestra, Volume 1, Psalms 1-5, Volume 2, Psalm 6-10, Volume 14, Psalms 120, 135, 1950, 1955. Psalm settings, 625 items unpublished. Settings of other biblical texts, 76 items. Liturgical texts, 56 items. Published musical compositions. Symphonic Psalms, the original text of the Book of Psalms, set to music in its entirety, in 15 volumes, 1951. The Visions Isaiah for baritone, voice and organ. Prayer for Peace for soprano, tenor, baritone and organ or piano. The Lord, for baritone and organ or piano. Koheleth Ecclesiastes for voice and piano. Tel Aviv for voice and piano. Alicia Fantasy for violin and piano. Iskra equals I Remember, oratorio published in New York by the Institute for New Music, 1953. A Little Palestinian New Year's Festival published by the Institute of New Music Jerusalem / New York, 1946. Sextet for clarinet, 2 violins, viola, cello, and piano in 3 movements, 1951. The Song of Songs, Sonata No. 3 for violin solo. Simonson Chitney, The Season of Our Gladness, a Succoth song for baritone and piano. The Eternal has consoled his people, he has freed Jerusalem, hymn, for viola or voice, and piano or orchestra, New York, Jerusalem, Institute of New Music, 1948. Ora Lala, My Beloved and My Beloved is Mine, for violin, cello, and piano. Instruments. In 1926, Stroop built a bichromatic quarter-tone harmonium from Mordecai Sandberg with white keys for the whole tones, black keys for the half-tones, and brown keys for the quarter-tones. This instrument is now in the museum at York University, Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Articles. Tafkut HaMuzik Bavinian Horitz, The Purpose of the Music in the Erection of the Land, published in Halal No. 1, Jerusalem, 1930 p23. Die Tondeferenzierung und Einherbejudung, Leipzig, Kistner and Siegel, 1930.